have been in Genesis 17 and 18, where there's this conversation between God and Abraham. Sarah laughs. She gets rebuked, and she's like, "No, I didn't do that." And I was like, "Yes, you did." I'm not going to reread the whole text because it is essentially a whole chapter. But it's the promise of Isaac's birth, but we have not yet got to Isaac's birth. So we're continuing on. I want to draw your attention to verse 20 of chapter 17. You'll recall, as God is promising Isaac's birth, Abraham's response is, "Let Ishmael be the heir." And in verse 20, God does speak to Ishmael, and you'll remember when God was talking with Hagar previously, God said, "I'm going to bless him," called him a wild donkey of a man, and that is what I've been meaning to rename my fantasy football team. I was like, I have a good one for this. That's what it was, wild donkeys. Okay, moving on. In verse 20 it says, "As for Ishmael, I have heard you. Behold, I have blessed him and will make him fruitful and multiply him. He shall father 12 princes, and I will make him into a great nation." Okay, now the number 12 hopefully sticks out to you a little bit, because this is very consistent when God is talking about the organization of his people. So Israel was made up of 12 tribes. And then in the New Testament, you have the 12 disciples. So it flags for us, Ishmael is being promised 12 princes. And it's almost setting Ishmael up as a parody of Isaac and Jacob. It's very close to, we'll say, the actual promise, but there's a distinction there, because God is saying the heir to Abraham's promise is Isaac. And maybe the greatest, you can look through history and you can say, well, how does Israel do versus how do the nations that descend from Ishmael do? And we can look at the conflicts and whatever, but the most evident difference as far as this covenant is concerned is that one of these two tribes gave birth to Jesus, and the other one didn't. So at very least the promise to Abraham that all nations of the world will be blessed through you, it is true of Israel, because Israel gave birth to Jesus. And he blessed all nations of the world. Ishmael did not have that advantage. So that's a notable difference. And I would suspect that a lot has been written about kind of comparing and contrasting Ishmael and Isaac. I don't know how fruitful that conversation is, other than it is probably fairly interesting from a historical perspective to kind of trace the different nations that came from both and say, oh, well, this is where they ended up versus where Israel, and the nations that come from both, from Ishmael versus Isaac, they are in conflict on a fairly regular basis. So we'll say the tension between Sarah and Hagar does not stop with them. So that's 12 princes. And then you have this this promise, obviously, of Isaac himself. And that is kind of moving forward into the second part of the reading into verse 18. And what's interesting is kind of if you put yourself in the shoes of the folks who are hearing this promise or who are aware of this promise, Abraham has had this in his mind for a very long time. Because God made these promises to him way back. Almost before he started traveling to some extent. But for some others, people in Abraham's camp, certainly Hagar and Ishmael, it is entirely possible that they weren't aware of the scope of these promises. So, and that includes Sarah. Now, could Abraham have told Sarah about, I had this conversation with God and this is what he promised me? I imagine it would be noteworthy. But as far as this detail of the extent to which God has made these promises to Abraham, Sarah might actually be in the dark on some of it, which helps kind of explain why her response is to laugh. Because she thinks this is just kind of this newfangled idea where God and Abraham are aware of this deal, this promise, this covenant, it goes back pretty far. Okay? So this is a seal of that old transaction, even though it is maybe new for some of the others. Moving forward to the three visitors that are part of this conversation, and you guys brought this up a little bit in our conversation last week, the identity of these three visitors. The best understanding is, and this is actually the only reputable understanding I really found, was God and two angels. There are some who have written something to the effect of, well, these are the three persons of the Trinity. And we say, nope, because God is one person. And we could recite the whole Athanasian Creed, kind of, not one Lord, but three Lords. No, not three Lords, but one Lord. Sorry, messed that one up. Not three gods, but one God.
You're saying God is infinite and you don't touch it?
Yes. Yes. Maybe. I say, yeah, so the reason I say maybe is because I'm following your logic. If we're talking about God incarnate, that is Jesus, and that's how we define that. But also, the titles being ascribed to this figure typically get used for the Father, which isn't the strongest argument, but it's like, okay, it's weird that this is the title getting used if it is. If it's not the Father, although Abraham didn't have awareness of it, you could send in a whole lot of arguments. That's why I kind of leave it as this is God. Period. We're done. It's the same as like when God is walking in the garden with Adam. Well, was that Jesus walking in the garden, or was that the Father? And it's like, guys, just God was walking in the garden, and we'll leave it there. Yes. So, and then he shares this meal, and it's a little interesting. He has this initial offering. Oh Lord, if I have found favor in your sight, do not pass by your servant. Let a little water be brought, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree, that I might bring a morsel of bread. And then you skip forward, and this is what he tells Sarah in verse 6. Quick, 3 seahs of fine flour, knead it, and make cakes. He runs to the herd, took a calf, gave it to a young man who prepared it quickly. Then he took curds and milk, and the calf he prepared and set before them. So he says, oh, let me just give you like a little bit of bread. And he's like, no, fresh baked bread, and we're going to go get some steaks, and we're going to do a whole thing. Okay? So there is a kind of self-deprecating under exaggeration of what he does here. And it's worth noting, especially kind of from our perspective, the culture of the Middle East, especially in biblical times, but as far as I understand it, still to a degree today, hospitality is a very high priority. It's considered a very important virtue, and there's a logical reason for that. When you live in a desert, when you live in a place that is so difficult to live in, you support each other, you're hospitable to each other, because the alternative is to let people die. Like if a stranger comes into your town 3,000 years ago, and you live in the middle of the desert, and they say, can I please have some water? And you say no, you have condemned them to die. So the willingness to kind of open up and say, yes, I'm willing to help you survive in this environment is a virtue. Having said that, what Abraham does would still be considered far above the norm. Because he's not just giving them what they need to continue on their journey. He is feeding them well and treating them from his own kind of coffers. So it is worth noting that difference here, and reminds us that Abraham recognizes who he's dealing with, at least to some extent. And we talked about last week, I don't think at this point Abraham really understands the extent of who God is. And he's learning, and I don't think we fault him for that because he knows what he's seen. And he's seen some incredible things, but he doesn't have the concept of all powerful. He's like, this is a powerful entity, but he lives in a world where he doesn't have the Bible to rely on and say, oh, he can do anything. So he asks questions like, I'm a little old, like, I don't know how you propose to do this. So again, he recognizes the importance of God even if he doesn't fully understand the identity of this person he is entertaining. Does that make sense?
He doesn't have any reference.
Yeah, he is operating with a blank slate. All he knows is that this guy is powerful. So, Sarah's disbelief does persist. She overhears it from the tent. She laughs. She's like, huh, that's not likely. But what we see through this entire narrative is the increasing revelation of God's power and what he is willing and able to do for his people at this point, which is Abraham and Abraham's family. Okay? And that's something it's worth keeping in mind, especially as we continue to go through Genesis, is every generation gets a little bit more understanding of who God is, what he's capable of. And sometimes we forget that because, especially if you've been in the church for a long time, you know who God is. Not fully. No one can fully understand God, but you get the all-powerful thing, right? You get the omnipotent. Like, we know, as far as we are capable, how big he is. So sometimes we forget that Abraham didn't have those advantages. He's still figuring out who is this thing that I have made a deal with. Okay? But then his descendants start to understand a little more. Isaac knows more about God than Abraham did. Jacob knows more about God than Isaac did. Joseph certainly knows more about God than any of his predecessors. And then you get all the way to the Jews at the time of Jesus, who understood everything except for what Jesus had to bring to the table, which is admittedly a fairly significant piece. But, yeah. There I am. Why did I say that? Okay, so in a bit of a shift, starting at verse 16, you get this. They had the conversation with Abraham and to a different degree Sarah, right? And then there's the shift where God is talking with these two angels he brought with him about what they are about to do to Sodom and Gomorrah. And they're having this conversation about, well, do we tell Abraham? Like, how do we cue him in? What do we do here? And there's a little bit of a discussion to be had, although I don't know how exactly we would most helpfully frame it, of knowledge versus ignorance. And from Abraham's perspective, is it a blessing to know? Or is it knowledge that he is burdened with? Especially in light of it happening. Right? Because this is a little bit of a spoiler, I guess. But Abraham, when he finds out about what's going to happen in Sodom and Gomorrah, he has this conversation with God of like, well, what if there are, 20 righteous people in the city? What about 10? How about 5? And he has this conversation about God where he feels like he is part of the decision-making process, or at least informing it. And then the city gets raised anyway. And for him, you have to wonder, does he carry guilt about that? If you had asked Abraham a year after Sodom and Gomorrah, do you wish you hadn't known ahead of time? I don't know what he would have said, right? But you have to imagine maybe ignorance is bliss. Maybe not. Maybe Abraham hated those guys anyway. He was like, no, good. Some sucked. I don't know. Doesn't sound like it's a good character for Abraham, but Abraham. What's interesting here, and we'll see it even more when we read the conversation about Sodom, is Abraham's almost treated as a friend. Abraham went with him to send them on their way, and the Lord said, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do, seeing that he'll shall surely become a great and mighty nation? For I've chosen him that he might command his children and his house hold after him to keep the way of the Lord." And they had this conversation, and it doesn't come across as God speaking just to his subjects, his underlings, whatever. It very much comes across almost as a conversation between friends that God is contemplating here. And I think that is a perspective worth keeping in mind as we read the next section. Okay? Because the next section also can teach us something about prayer. All right? So kind of keep your ears up for those things, for kind of the tone of Abraham's conversation with God, and also maybe what can it teach us about our own conversations with God. All right, so with that, let's step forward into Genesis 18, starting at verse 22. So the men, this is God and his two servants, turned from there and went towards Sodom. But Abraham still stood before the Lord. Then Abraham drew near and said, "Will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Will you then sweep away the place and not spare it for the 50 righteous who are in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to put the righteous to death with the wicked, so that the righteous fare as the wicked. Far be it from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just?" And the Lord said, "If I find at Sodom 50 righteous in the city, I will spare the whole place for their sake." Abraham answered and said, "Behold, I have undertaken to speak to the Lord, I who am but dust and ashes. Suppose 5 of the 50 righteous are lacking. Will you destroy the whole city for lack of 5? And he said, "I will not destroy it if I find 45 there." Again he spoke to him and said, "Suppose 40 are found there." He answered, "For the sake of 40 I will not do it." Then he said, "Oh, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak. Suppose 30 are found there." He answered, "I will not do it if I find 30 there." He said, "Behold, I have undertaken to speak to the Lord. Suppose 20 are found there." He answered, "For the sake of 20 I will not destroy it." Then he said, "Oh, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak again, but this once. Suppose 10 are found there." He answered, "For the sake of 10 I will not destroy it." And the Lord went his way when he finished speaking to Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place. All right. So if you guys, actually, yeah, we're going to do this. So turn to your tables for, let's just do 3 or 4 minutes of, is there anything that stands out? Is there any questions you have about these verses?
He is assuming this person is capable of destroying the whole city. He knows this guy is capable of destroying the city.
Maybe there's a series that he's not necessarily behind God.
Well, he doesn't know that part.
I think it would have gone down to one.
I think you're right. I think, like, I can't imagine, like, David has this conversation after he sees God strike down Uriah.
Yeah, so he's
Or strike down
he's not telling
Uzzah.
us. He is very big church.
Correct or not?
But at the same time,
I don't think.
not
My
to
dad's had
but there are people today who have the power to
the
choice.
strongest faith of anybody I've ever known.
Case in point,
Yeah.
the president has to,
Yes.
could destroy us. There are people who have no problem telling him, you shouldn't do that, and protesting him. So there is some level of, maybe he did know, but Abraham assumed that his relationship with God was strong enough to keep him safe. I don't know if that's the case, that's just kind of my,
Yeah, there you
well,
go.
I feel like the pastor should call himself devil's advocate. We'll just call me a wild donkey. That's what we'll do.
I know you want to say something, he's written all of these specs.
I'm trying to think of a clever way to say it. Something's coming to mind.
That's okay, just say it.
I seem to recall a Bible verse that says, no one is righteous, no enough.
Yes, yes.
When we read this conversation, there's a little bit of money.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's kind of just Abraham, like, yeah, sure. And then it's how he knows there's no one. Yeah, Abraham was counted as righteous because of his faith. Right. But he's still spared. So apparently.
No, he wasn't like you.
Not all.
Well,
That's true. That is the truth. Rip Lot's wife. The pillar of salt, not the best thing.
So he spares them for
We're going to talk, that's the next section. There are a couple of different thoughts on that.
Well,
It could be, there's a website, it's a great website. But, for a certain kind of person, called Despair.com. And they sell demotivational posters. So if you've ever seen a poster with like a cat hanging from trees, says hang in there.
Yeah.
Despair.com has sent us posters where it's like a picture of the Titanic and it says it could be the purpose of your life is to be an example to others. So sometimes I come across stories like Lot's and I'm like, maybe they're just there to be an example for the rest of us. I don't know about Lot, but there are definitely some biblical characters. I'm like, you just exist so that all the rest of us can learn this lesson. All right. So what's saying is I almost have to know what that conversation ended on.
Margie smells something.
You all smell something burning?
Nope.
No, then what's wrong with me? It's like somebody had an iron on and scorched with that.
I hope not.
Della says she smells it. You don't smell it? She says she. No. Me too, it's been really strong.
Internet, you ignore this part. It smells different here than it does, I don't know.
When you walk by it, like.
Yeah, I just stink. Yikes. I don't know if I got burned. Well, if that ceiling tile starts turning black, we'll know we're in trouble. I'll keep an eye on it. The reason I feel comfortable being so flippant in my comment is because I know all of the wires in that room and none of them are running high enough voltage to cause serious damage. Like, they might melt some plastic, but they won't actually start a fire. Probably, unless someone did something they shouldn't have done, in which case. What do you mean? Why are you looking at me like that?
120 volts on your lights, right?
I was thinking about the sound, actually. I assumed that they could get the lighting right.
And we had a fire. In a classroom.
Oh, well. So we'll just keep, if by the end of class it's still just Della and Margie, we won't worry about it. But if it's spread to the whole table, we'll be like, okay, so it's getting worse. I'll go call Bruce. So other than the weird smell, yeah, someone give me something to think about that's related to Sodom and Gomorrah.
Fire.
I knew it. I looked over, I saw the grin on John's face, and I was like, oh, I shouldn't have said that. Any questions? Anything that stands out? You're like, wow. Other than how nonchalant Pastor Josh is about a potential fire in the ceiling. It comes and goes. Were we just talking about the football game tonight? Is that the...
Is there a football game tonight?
It hurts me a little bit that you asked that question, but yes. Yeah, Dallas is going to get whooped on by the Eagles. Yeah.
Now, this is the first drill.
First row, it's the first Sunday night football game. It's not on Sunday night. And NBC paid the rights for it. I thought today, as I was walking around campus, I was like, I am going to submit a petition to my congressman for a law that I think everyone can get behind and would never pass. If you pay for a service, they should not be allowed to advertise on that service because you are paying for it.
I think that's an excellent idea.
Right? Everybody except for the lobbyists for those services is going to be on board with this idea.
Those services, and I'm sitting out of seeing all the ads for, get this, get that.
Well, I can't do anything for that.
And then you show it, it's like, oh, that looks like a good show. Wait a minute, it's on one of those channels.
Well, steal some passwords. Come on now. I'm kidding. Don't steal them. Share them. I'm also still kidding about them.
It's also going to let you send packages to people, or order packages for people that want to in your house. Or you can put in
Rude.
the free, and
Rude. And ESPN's adding commercials for Red Zone. That's what was the straw for me. I'm like, I'm paying for Red Zone. Don't try to sell me crap during Red Zone. Anyway, this is not the point of this session. I am all over the place today.
what if?
You could do a lot of editing, huh?
The thing is, I won't. So anyway, thank you.
Anyway, the thing that.
What stood out to you?
Stood out to me was, Abraham doesn't mind talking to God. I mean, he knows his being is very powerful and knowing and being and everything. But he doesn't mind talking to him, but he's doing it very respectfully. He's not like trying to bargain with, he's kind of trying to bargain with God, but he's not telling God what to do. He's not saying,
Right.
listen, do this,
Better.
save these people. He's just asking, would you?
Well, and every additional time he speaks up, no, my battery's dying. That's okay. Every additional time he speaks up, he's like, I'm sorry for saying anything, but if I were to say something, here's what I would say.
Yeah, very respectful, and that, so he knows that he needs to approach with respect.
This is
but
someone
still,
who can
he's not
destroy a whole
afraid-
city. I should
Yeah.
come correct.
But he's not afraid to ask.
Yeah.
So that probably teaches us, as long as we shouldn't be afraid to ask God, as long as
Yeah.
you're respectful in time. Just saying, about your will be done, not mine.
Yeah. Making demands of God doesn't tend to work out great for people. Respectfully asking has its moments. But
Abraham knows that Lot sits on him.
yeah, so I wonder if that's what he's saying. He's like,
Here's my family members that I'm pretty sure.
as Lot? Cool. Well, and to your comment of,
That's not. I did before. I know, I do.
oh no.
Okay.
Bruce is
Lots
gonna
of
love
walking,
this.
don't come this way.
Okay.
Anyway, maybe it's.
It'll probably be fine for another 20 minutes, right?
Mentality, smell or something.
Hysteria,
Yeah.
So,
mass hysteria.
to your comment about Sodom and Gomorrah, I think a lot of times when we read this, we read it as like a negotiation, as like a haggling kind of thing. And it could, like, that could have been the tone of the conversation. I don't want to deny that entirely. But I think it's also worth thinking, is Abraham just exploring God's covenant? And kind of an example I thought of, just because it was on the radio news this morning. If I were to say to you, I buy a Powerball ticket when the value gets high, but I don't tell you what the magic number is. You say, well, do you buy a ticket if it's worth 100 million? What about if it's worth 500? And like you're trying to find out what's my threshold, but you're doing it in like a conversational front. By the way, the number is $1 billion.
So this side.
Yeah, so we're not actually going to have this conversation. I'm going to tonight anyway. But you have to wonder, is that what Abraham's? Because like we said, Abraham is still learning who God is. So is he like, well, so you're going to destroy the city? Would you still destroy it if there were 50 dead people in it? And then he brings it down, and you have to wonder, is he negotiating for the city? Or is he trying to figure out how merciful is God? Or not even how merciful, but like, what does it take to stave off God's wrath? So like I said, he could have been haggling, especially keeping in mind Lot is in the city. So Abraham is invested in the city, at least to some. He did go to war for Lot, so obviously he cares at least a little bit.
So you do like when there's natural disasters in my families anywhere, you give them and, prayer comes and I go, keep my family safe, and then I go, well, I keep everybody
And
safe.
everybody else.
But here's the people, I'm real in it.
Yeah. Well, and we even do that in like our prayers in church. We pray for all those who are sick and suffering, especially insert names of those on our prayer list that have expressed a desire for their name to be public list. So, like I don't want to say Abraham is definitely doing one or the other, but I would invite you to at least consider when you read this text, when you look at this text, maybe he's just exploring where God's lines are.
And he's also acknowledging the power of God. And
Yeah.
He could save the town for just about, or he could destroy the town.
Yeah. And no point is Abraham like, I don't think you're really going to do it. Which is terrifying. I mean, just think of meeting someone who can casually, outside of our usual realm of experience, for sure. One of the commentaries I read, I think it was a commentary, it might have actually just been a study Bible notes, compared Abraham's conversation here to the whys and what ifs of a child. You know, when you tell a kid, we're going to do this thing, or we're going to go to this place, they have a lot of questions, and it's not like sometimes it is, but a lot of times it's not. They're not haggling with you. They're trying to figure out what's going on. And this is, just to point out, keep in mind, this is actually Abraham's second intervention for Sodom. Right? Because here he's intervening with God, but previously he went to war because the king of Sodom had lost a war. And that was the conflict that ended with the encounter with Melchizedek. So if you guys remember that back from chapters 13 and 14. It was a while back. We've been at this for a minute. All right, anything else on that before we move to the actual Sodom and Gomorrah experience? Yes, sir.
You said Abraham didn't know God. Isaac knows either God or of God or about God more than Abraham. And down the line, which I don't necessarily agree with that unless you show me scripturally if that's the case. But I understand what you're saying. Somewhere in scripture it says that they knew more about or whatever. I see where you're going with that. That's just a sidebar. I'm not sure I'm on board with that.
Well, does scripture go out and say it like that? I don't think so. But if you were to read how does Isaac interact with God, it seems that there is a lot more background knowledge there, or especially when you get to Joseph. And Joseph has these interactions with God. It's like Joseph seems to know a lot more about
But
this.
I could make a case for some of the stumblings of Jacob and others. I'm not sure Abraham would have made those same stumblings, but that's life.
Abraham did lie about his wife twice, so that she would get married to other
But
guys.
the other point that I picked up on this was when you talked about authoritative and authoritarian,
Yes.
and God
is authoritative here?
here and not authoritarian. And God's very patient. That's one thing, and I think that applying to in today's world, parenting. It's what you talked about when a child asks why, or where he does, and you're about to be in trouble because you're asking, you're not in a position to ask why. Authoritarian parent versus authoritative.
Do those two terms mean anything to everybody here? Because I don't know where I've
I
explained.
don't know where it was, but yeah.
Okay, so and this comes from developmental psychology. There is a best parenting style. And nobody likes to hear that because if you're like, when you're in a class of college kids, nobody wants to be like, oh, my parent didn't do that. They're not. And like the professor's always good to say, like, that's not to say your parents were bad, but that is to say that they could potentially have done better. Because when you look at the evidence surrounding different categories of parenting styles, there is one that across the board results in better outcomes for children. They're more successful, they tend to be better educated, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's wild. Now, it's not like hyper-specific parenting style. There are 4 overarching categories. And the 2 that John is talking about, you have authoritative and authoritarian parents. Authoritative parents say, this is what we're doing. The kid's like, why? And the parent explains why. But at no point is it like, well, the kid doesn't get to change the decision. Or if there's a rule, the kid, you can ask, well, why does that rule exist? The authoritative parent happily answers, the rule does not change. but the authoritative parent is open to changing the rules if there is compelling reason to do. Like if your kid makes a really good argument for, I think we should adjust this rule, the authoritative parent is willing to do that if the reasons are genuinely good. An authoritarian parent is the quintessential, we are doing this because I said so. Why? Because I said so. Okay? And I think you're exactly right. This is what God is doing here. He's, in a manner of speaking, he is authoritatively parenting Abraham. I'm going to do this, but I'll explain at least a little bit to you. I've been thinking more, I don't think it's just parenting either. I think leadership is also, if you look at a lot of leadership literature today, authoritative leaders tend to do a lot better than authoritarian leaders. Authoritarian leaders tend to breed turnover. Yeah. No, authoritative is the best. Authoritarian is just not. But it's the alternative, yes. For anyone who's keeping track, the other two, you have permissive parents, and permissive parents kind of just let whatever happen. They love their kid, but the kid kind of runs the show. And then you have, I think this is the word that the literature uses, but I'd have to check. I said it's neglectful parents. And that is, kid can do whatever they want because the parent doesn't even know where the kid is. Ever. Doesn't care. So, those are the two. And they eat we're not going to get into this, but what's interesting is each of the other three that's not authoritative tends to result in different but identifiable kinds of problems. Like I can meet someone, and honestly, if you let me just kind of watch someone for like a half hour to an hour, I could probably tell you what kind of parent they have. It's not always true, but like 90% of the time. You can look and you're like, your parents never told you no, did they? It's worse when they're adults. You being an adult, you've never been told no. That's why you are the way you are. Don't love it. Because often you discover that when you're needing to tell them no. Yep. Anything else on Sodom and Gomorrah? Well, on the precursor to Sodom and Gomorrah?
In the study Bible, it says Sodom was one of 5 cities. Does it ever mention the other 3?
I think the place we could go to get those is if we flip back to Genesis 14. You have Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, and Bela, and that's all listed in verse 2. Those are all the cities of a certain alliance. So that would be my guess at what those 5 cities are referring to. Because I'm assuming if they're in alliance with each other, they're regionally connected. Because back in Abraham's time, it wouldn't have made a lot of sense to have an alliance with a city on the other side of the world, because by the time they got any help to you for anything, you would already be toast. So, yeah. Okay. So the next section is 22 verses, and we have 8 minutes left. Do we want to just start with chapter 19 next week, or do we want to read it and maybe talk about it at your tables a little bit today? Sure. Start next week or start it right now? Anybody want to disagree? Nope. All right, we will go ahead into it then. Genesis 19, starting at verse 1. The 2 angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them and bowed himself with his face to the earth and said, "My lords, please turn aside to your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet. Then you may rise up early and go on your way." They said, "No, we will spend the night in the town square." But he pressed them strongly, so they turned aside to him and entered his house. And he made them a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. But before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both old and young, all the people to the last man, surrounded the house. And they called to Lot, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may know them." Lot went out to the men at the entrance, shut the door after him, and said, "I beg you, my brothers, do not act so wickedly. Behold, I have 2 daughters that have not known any man. Let me bring them out to you, and do to them as you please. Only do nothing to these men, for they have come under the shelter of my roof." But they said, "Stand back." And they said, "This fellow came to sojourn, and he has become the judge. Now we will deal worse with you than with them." Then they pressed hard against the man Lot, and drew near to break the door down. But the men reached out their hands, and brought Lot into the house with them, and shut the door. And they struck with blindness the men who were at the entrance of the house, both small and great, so that they wore themselves out groping for the door. Then the men said to Lot, "Have you anyone else here, sons-in-law, sons, daughters, or anyone you have in the city? Bring them out of this place. For we are about to destroy this place, because the outcry against his people has become great before the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it." So Lot went out and said to his sons-in-law, who were to marry his daughters, "Up, get out of this place, for the Lord is about to destroy the city." But he seemed to his sons-in-law to be jesting. As morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, "Up, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be swept away in the punishment of the city." But he lingered. So the men seized him and his wife and his 2 daughters by the hand, the Lord being merciful to him, and they brought him out and set him outside the city. And as they brought them out, one said, "Escape for your life. Do not look back or stop anywhere in the valley. Escape to the hills, lest you be swept away." And Lot said to them, "Oh no, my lords, behold, your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have shown me great kindness in saving my life. But I cannot escape to the hills, lest the disaster overtake me and I die. Behold, this city is near enough to flee to, and it is a little one. Let me escape there. Is it not a little one? Then my life will be saved." He said to him, "Behold, I grant you this favor also, that I will not overthrow the city of which you have spoken. Escape there quickly, for I can do nothing until you arrive there." Therefore, the name of the city was called Zoar. All right, you guys want to highlight any questions, anything that stands out? You might want to write it down so we can talk about it next week, but a couple minutes at your tables and then we'll pray out. Okay. And go.
They forcefully take it out. Those two obvious are quite a building when you get over here. I think I've been leaving. They took it. I think it's something special, but not. Yeah. Any comprehension that they could do what they can do. Yeah.
So in verse 22, it says, "See Psalms 106 and chapter 14.
Yeah, because when they came to Abraham, they called it, we assumed it was. Does that smell strong? So I think that Yes, yeah, yes. I mean, it's just. And really, it's compassion. I mean, it wasn't, nobody drives through everyday relationships. Yeah, so obviously, they would have treated anybody bad.
Yeah, I guess that was just the way they.
It just smells like rags that haven't been washed in too long to me in the kitchen. In the kitchen, not.
Yeah. No, I had thought
My allergies are also not doing great, so I can't smell too much of it.
All right, folks, let's go ahead and pray, and next week we'll come back and we'll get into our discussion about Genesis 19. All right? Heavenly Father, we thank you for bringing us together today. Bless our conversations of your word, that all that is faithful would sit with us and would impact our lives in the ways you need it to. We ask that you bless us as we go on our way. Bless the members of our community here who weren't able to be with us this morning, that we would all come together again soon, gathered around who you are and pointing each other to your Son. It's in his name we pray. Amen.